Well, hi, everybody. I'm back with Jeffrey Cranford. We're going to do one last session on
Let's
this
do it.
idea of knowing, loving, and serving Christ. And Jeff, we set it up in that order.
Right.
Know God. Then as you know Him, you begin to understand who He is and love Him. And because you love Him, you want to serve Him. And yet I also recognize a backwards thing in that. When I serve Him and see the beauty that happens in my life, it causes me to love Him more, which causes me to want to know Him more. Similar to what we've been talking about in the gospel, we said the lever is the last thing, and you said, well, the lever is what gives you speed, and speed's what gives you distance. And we know every golfer loves distance.
Absolutely.
So now you add the lever, and they start hitting it 10 yards further, 15 yards further, and suddenly they go, wow, I like this. Tell me more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so there is this kind of complete entangling of these three things, which we started with. You have to have the fluidity, which is the kind of the natural entangling of those things where you stop thinking about it and it all becomes what your golf swing is. Do you ever get to that point in your walk with Christ, though, where you stop thinking about it? Or do we still have to keep attending to each of these things? And to what measure do we do that?
I think it's both. I think because we are flesh still, and Paul talks a lot about this in Romans 7. Sometimes the very thing he wants to do, he finds himself pulled in a different direction. He calls it the law of sin or the principle of sin in different translation. There's always going to be that pull the other way. But I think there is a dynamic that begins to occur as you continue in this cycle, but you must see results. I mean, one of the things that's so frustrating, people take lessons. I did everything he told me to. I did this and this, and I practiced and practiced, and I never got any better. In fact, I got worse because I was always thinking about it. It never became natural. I think to some degree we'll always have a little bit of a mechanism working there because we'll examine ourselves. In fact, Paul says, examine yourselves to see if you're in the faith. That's an examination of, is this right? I think about Jack Nicklaus. He had not maybe the greatest instructor, but he had a guy named Jack Grout that he started with. And Jack Grout, every year, you know what they'd do? They'd go back and at the beginning of the season, he'd say, Jack, I want a lesson before he started the season. And what did they do? Nicklaus would say, he'd check my grip, he'd check my alignment, he'd check my posture, and we just go back kind of the basics. I think there's a place where you can go back to the basics. Mm-hmm. But there's also a place where at times you just have to, quote unquote, let the Spirit lead. To do all this, you've got to believe in those three foundations. Mm-hmm. There has to be a place. And the Lord kind of says this, taste and see that the Lord is good. See if by studying the Word you don't learn to know Him. See if in coming to know Him you don't begin to love Him more. And see out of that love if there's not a burgeoning desire to actually serve Him. Not because you're doing it to be saved, you're doing it because you just love Him. And then there's just this day, Jesus said it, my burden is easy and my yoke is light. When you're starting the process, you're like, no way, man, that is not true. His very burdensome. It's a yoke. I lived this life and now I'm struggling. Well, those are only in the early days. There will be a place. In technical terms, I have a lot of guys that work, some good friends that work with some of the tour players and travel around with those guys. And we say, we got to get the reps in until we own it. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's a place on tour. I can do it in my mind, but I've got to do it enough times. And so they'll go work it out on drills and drills and drills and drills. And all of a sudden they wake up one day and they say, it's just happening. And I think there's a great spiritual parallel there. You got to do enough reps until where you just own it and it becomes a natural part of you. We're never made perfect, but we strive for perfection. Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, Jesus said. Maybe we never attain it in this life, and we don't because we're drugged down by the flesh, but there is a deep, abiding desire. If I just keep doing the reps, something's going to happen. I believe it. And all of a sudden you move into a supernatural dynamic relationship with Jesus, and then it gets real fluid again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice. Mm-hmm.
Wow, I would love to be able to look back and say, I've got it all going, and it's flowing, and the shots are coming in my golf game. I'd love to look at my life and say, wow, Lord, it's just clicking along, and the walk of faith is there, but I do need to attend. And so I always need to do both those things. Sometimes I need to step out in faith. God's prepared me for what's going on. The reps have set me up for it. But other times I need to go back to the reps and keep checking my life in that way and allowing the Lord to do what He has.
Absolutely. And it's always progressive in life. And I'll close with this. Think about this. pros always talk. Sports psychologist, David Cook, who wrote the 7 Days of Utopia, a great sports psychologist, was on our board for many years and a good friend of our ministry. Talk about how do you get to the zone, the zone. You're not in the zone all the time, but sometimes when the Spirit empowers you, you're sharing Christ, you're doing in the middle of something, all of a sudden you realize you transcend time and you move into the zone. You don't even know what happened. You look back and you go, wow, it wasn't even me. Guess what? You just gave yourself over to the Holy Spirit. And He actually did His work through you.
Wow. Well, let's endeavor to do that, to give our lives over to the Holy Spirit. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.